I will present the webinar, and then at the end, we will open it for question and answer. But as we go through this, if you have any questions, please enter those in the chat window. And once we finish up, we'll make sure that we answer all those questions, okay? The first statistic I want to show here is to show that the failure rate on new products being brought into the marketplace is very high. And I have two different statistics here, but it shows that the failure rate of new products is somewhere between 75 to 95%. And I think there's some dependencies on which industry you happen to be in, or you know, the exact maturity of your company, maybe the maturity of the industry that you're in. But overall, it's very clear that developing new products and taking those into the marketplace is a risky endeavor. And so what I want to do today is to present to you some of the reasons why products fail in the marketplace and what we need to be able to do as entrepreneurs or companies to reduce the risk and increase our chances for success. So first, I want to talk about 5 different reasons why I see products fail in the marketplace. And the first one is the one that I think is the biggest reason, especially when we look at entrepreneurs. And so often what happens is that an entrepreneur thinks of an idea, they decide that because they thought of it, it's a brilliant idea, and everybody else wants that same product. And so they build the product and take it to market, and it ends up being unsuccessful. And it's because they never really understood whether anyone else in the market was willing to pay to buy that product. Now, related to that, and these I show the next 5 here, is that it's possible that you've actually thought of an idea that other people think is important for them or helps solve an important problem for them, but there's not enough people that have that problem. It's possible that they may actually have a problem that you think you can solve. There could even be many people, but your approach to solving that problem is not adequate. Another reason is that you may have identified an opportunity. People really want the product, but they're not willing to pay enough to make it a profitable product. One of the examples I think of is back in the period of the dot-com boom, where there were many companies that established themselves and thought that if they just grew enough that they could be profitable. But the challenge was that they never had business models that were profitable or had a very good chance of becoming profitable. And so in this process of pursuing new product opportunities, we need to ensure that not only are we solving important problems, but that also people are willing to pay something for it and that it can be profitable. Now, the last point is this: not be able to communicate a clear reason to purchase the solution. And so it's not, even if people say they need it and you build it, you have to be able to communicate back to them and let them know that you can help solve that problem. In English, we have a saying that goes something like, if you build a better mousetrap, the world will be a pathway to your door. The problem is that's not true. Even if you build something that is better and is something that people would want to buy, they're not just going to come to you and buy it. You have to be able to communicate to them that it is valuable and that they should buy it from you. So from my experience in working with a number of different companies, when I look at products that are successful in the marketplace, they have these 3 main components to it. So one is that it's a compelling market opportunity. okay, and it addresses a compelling market opportunity. The word compelling, the best translation for that in Spanish is contundente, is what I've discovered. And so if that's a new word for you in English, I think contundente. And so the characteristics of a compelling market opportunity is that it's a big, painful issue, okay? Many people in the market are willing to pay to solve that problem. And so that's the key to making it compelling. Then you need to deliver a compelling solution that addresses that problem, which means it has a value proposition that your potential buyers or potential customers care about. You can do it profitably, and that you can get it to the market quick enough that you're able to go and beat competitors and capture the market that is interested in that product. The third is the compelling market strategy. And so this is, how do you motivate your target market to solve the problem with your solution? So that's the bottom line of what we want to do. So they've expressed to us they have a problem. We've created a solution that we believe solves that problem, but now we have to communicate that back to our market and let them know that we are indeed able to solve that problem for them. Now, to get there is what I will describe as a discovery and validation process. And so what that really means is it's not a one-time event. It's not something that we do once and we know we have it right, because there's a lot of learning that goes into that. So what I'm going to propose here is a model for discovery and validation, which will allow you to do a better job of evaluating market opportunities and creating the right product for that. Now, as we look at this model, there's 4 key pillars that we're building everything on. The starting point for that is the market problem. And I will describe what I mean by market problem in the next few slides. Then we build a product and build a business model around that solves that market problem. Then we create a market strategy that helps communicate the value to those who should want to buy our product. Now, what we have to do, though, is to discover what all those components are. And it starts off with what I will call a hypothesis, and I'll explain a little bit more about that. But basically, when you identify a potential opportunity, think of it not as I need to go pursue this, but I now have a hypothesis which I need to test and validate. Then, not only do I want to make sure the hypothesis is valid, but I want to make sure that the overall opportunity is valid. That is, there's many people that have the problem, they're willing to pay money to solve it, and we can make it profitable. Then we actually prepare the solution and make sure that the solution meets those needs. So that's in our new product, part of our new product development process. And then our ultimate validation is when we take it to the marketplace and we have customers who purchase the product. So as I mentioned, this is an iterative process. So it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to go out and do one round of work and you're going to have all the right answers. There's a learning process that goes on as part of this. And at each stage, you're going to continue to learn and make validation around the assumptions that you have used. The most important part of this, though, is to remember this is that we keep our customers or our target market at the center of this. This is not something that we try to do independently, sitting in our offices or sitting in our cubicles at work or wherever, that we are constantly in conversation with the potential customers that we think we can help. So these are these 4 key pillars, and this is what we're going to spend the rest of today's webinar on, is understanding these 4 key pillars and the key aspects around those. So the first thing is a market problem. And the key here is if you are not solving a market problem, there's not a need for your product. So everything that is presented as a product in one form or another, people are buying it because it addresses a particular need for them or addresses a particular problem. I'm going to go and describe more around what we mean by the problem, because this is such a core component to understanding how to create great products. The second then is, how do you solve the market problem is the definition of a product, which is your way of solving that market problem. And it has to be in a valuable way that the potential buyers appreciate, and it has to be differentiated from any competitors or other solutions in the marketplace. The third element is that business model. And when I talk about business model, it really addresses how do you deliver the benefit and how do you profitably capture that value. And I'll describe more around what I mean by business model in some later slides. But it's important to understand that your product and your business model have to work together to address the market problem. Finally, is that market strategy, defining who's going to buy it and why they're going to buy it, and be able to clearly communicate that to the customers that you want to have purchase your product. So if we look at this as somewhat of a process flow, our starting point is a clear understanding of that market problem. Then we build the product and a business model, and those go hand in hand, that address that market problem. And then we drive forward with our market strategy to communicate the value back out to the target market. So let's first talk more around the concept of the market problem. A basic definition around a market problem is a need or want that is unsatisfied. And so we think about things in our lives that we have needs or that we have wants that aren't being addressed in the way that we'd like them to, then that starts to be a point of a market problem. Another way to think about market problems are around those next two definitions, which is something someone wants to do and they can't do. So there's some kind of task that they're trying to accomplish and they currently are unable to do that. So that creates an opportunity tied back to a market problem. Or in another case, we just want to do something better. Now, if you think about our lives, and I'm talking both personal lives and business lives, we are constantly looking at ways to improve upon the things that we do. We want to be able to do things faster. We want to be able to do things better than we have in the past. We want to be able to do things cheaper. And so those are all drivers that if we understand clearly from our potential customers what it is they're trying to do or trying to do better, then we have a source of understanding market problems that can be addressed. The key around this is not just that it's a market problem, but it's a compelling market problem, which is many people have it. It's a big problem. If it's urgent to solve, that's even better. That means that as soon as you can solve it for me, I'm willing to pay. And the most important part is that they're willing to pay to solve that problem. Now, here's the challenge that we have to overcome, especially those of us who come from a technical background. And that challenge is that we start defining the solution before we completely understand the market problem that has to be solved. And so if you don't learn anything else from this webinar today, is think about, please understand, you don't jump to defining a solution just because you thought of it. You only start defining a solution when it is well understood. I think there's a quote by Albert Einstein that discusses that, the hardest part of coming up with a good solution or solving a problem is actually understanding the problem. And so that's the starting point of where we want to make sure we begin our efforts before we jump into developing a product to solve a problem that we don't understand. Now, when we think of needs and wants, most of you have probably seen this in some form or the other, but this is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This is a good starting point to think about when we think about problems that people want to be able to solve or needs that they have. And most of the needs, at least on a personal level, are going to fall somewhere along these different kinds of needs. And even if we are selling into businesses, so we need to understand what the needs of the buyer are. Sometimes, even in a business situation, somebody's going to make a buying decision that ties back to their need for self-actualization or self-esteem. Sometimes it may be just a security need that, my job is at risk, and if I don't solve this problem, I'm going to lose my job. And so this is a starting point for understanding needs and wants. And then that ties back to understanding market problems. So one of the key things is when we talk to people, we don't want to ask them what they want, okay? Henry Ford had a great quote that says, if I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. You have probably heard Steve Jobs, when he was alive, say, we couldn't ask people what they want because they could never have imagined, the iPod or the iPhone or the iPad, and so we couldn't ask them what they want. Well, that's true. We don't want to ask them what they want. What we really want to focus on is what is it they want to do? What is it they need to do? So instead of asking people what they want, you want to ask them what it is they want to do. And so if we look at Henry Ford, if he had gone and asked people what they want to do, and they, as far as transportation, they would have said, we want to be able to go from this point to this point and do it faster. And then they may have given a number of good reasons why they want to. We want to get to the market faster. We have friends and family that live long distances away, and we don't want to take so long to travel and visit it, okay? So that is what we're really trying to do, is understand what it is they want to do and not get them to tell us what the solution should be, because that's what we get to do. We get to develop the solution, and we get to apply our creativity in solving that. If we think about Apple, that's exactly what I think they did. I think when they launched the iPod into the market, or the iPhone or the iPad, they were never the first ones to launch a product of that category into the market. But I firmly believe that they had a very good and strong understanding of what people hated about the tools or the products that already existed in the market. And then they went and created products that addressed those problems, and they did it in a very, very innovative way. And so I think that is really what set them apart. Is they did start off, even though they say they don't do market research, I think they had a really good understanding of the needs before they tried to solve them, and then they went and solved them in very innovative and interesting ways. So the question that we're looking for is, what do they need to do? And I like this quote from Theodore Levitt, where he says, people don't want to buy a 1/4-inch drill, they want a 1/4-inch hole. It's just that the way for them to get a 1/4-inch hole is by using a drill. And so that's the focus that we need to have. What is somebody trying to accomplish? What are they trying to do? Once we understand that, then we have a better understanding of the market problems that they are trying to solve. So now let's move on to the product. So when we talk about a definition of a product, I like to use this definition that comes from Philip Kotler, who is considered the guru of marketing and has written a number of academic textbooks around marketing. But he defines a product as anything that can be offered to someone to satisfy a need or a want. And the reason I want to emphasize that is that when we talk about a product, we're talking about anything that is a physical good, which we typically call a product, or a service. All of those are forms of products in one way or the other. The key underlying commonality with any product is that it is delivering a benefit to the buyer or the user of that product. And so that, again, ties back to we understand the market problem. Now we create a product that delivers a benefit to the buyer and user by helping them solve that market problem. And it doesn't matter whether you are talking about goods or services, all of the concepts that we are talking about apply across the board. I now want to talk about the business model. And so the key question that we have to be able to answer is, how do we deliver the value and how do we capture that value in a way that we can make a profit from our product? And so the questions that we have to answer around our business model are, how will the solution be delivered? What is the cost to deliver that solution? And what is the cost to acquire the customers? Those all help us identify our cost. That's the underlying part of the business model. The second point is around, how do we actually get the customer, the product to the customer? What is our channel of distribution? So that ties back into how customers will be acquired and what is the cost to acquire those customers. And the last point about that is, who is going to pay and how much are they going to pay? And that's our revenue. So these are the 5 questions that we need to be able to answer around to help us develop our business model. And in the end, it has to be profitable or we really have no business. Now, the last point I want to make around your business model is that in many cases, it is so tightly linked to your product that it becomes a point of differentiation or competitive advantage. And so when you think about creating a competitive advantage or creating some point of differentiation, it's not just about the product, but sometimes it's the business model. And here in a couple of slides, I will give several examples of how that really is true. One of the key questions that we have to ask about a business model is the revenue part of it. And so questions like, who will pay, how much will they pay, how many ways will they pay, when will they pay, how often will they pay, and how long will they pay? So there are many different questions around the business model. And one of the things that I have seen over the last 10 years, basically, is I think our way of thinking about business models have become more sophisticated. And I think we've identified that there is more than one way to capture revenue. Today I was having lunch with a friend, and he was talking about a company based here in Austin, Texas, where I live, called Game Salad. And they create an application that people can use to build out games, mobile games. And what's interesting about it is that they have multiple sources of revenue as part of their business model. One is they sell the application to app developers. And so that's one of their revenue models. The second is that the app developers that are using their platform can also buy different components that are already built to add into their games. And so they have a market where third-party developers have developed these components, and they can purchase those and include those within their application. So there's a second point of revenue. And then the third point of revenue is in advertising. So anyone that builds one of these applications can use an advertising engine also. So if you bought any mobile applications, you've seen advertising in it. That's a third point of revenue that they are able to take advantage of. And so what you start to see there is that when we think about our revenue model, we want to be able to think very open and flexible about it, because that is a key part of building out a profitable business model. Now, there may be many cases of where you only have really one way of producing revenue. But if you can continue to think openly about where else can you add value to help solve problems, that allows you to think about strengthening your revenue model. Another question that we have to ask around the business model is it scalable? And so the key part of that is, can you continue to grow the business and add customers without increasing your costs at the same proportion? So if you look at a lot of services models, have a potential limitation on scalability because every time you add customers, you have to add a cost associated with it. But if you can add some tools and capabilities in place that make your services more efficient and more effective, then you can scale it without having to add cost at the same proportion. So when we look at the question around scalability, these are some of the points that we have to consider. So what are your fixed costs to build that solution? What are your ongoing operating costs? What systems do you need to develop so that you can scale? And finally, how many customers do you need to achieve to reach a break-even point? So that those are all considerations in your scalability. And so as you're thinking through your business and the business model, these are some additional questions to think of. So this is an example that I want to show of where the business model is a key component of the point of differentiation. And I know these are all based on examples from the U.S., but I hope that you can relate to these. But here are 4 different business models on which you can go and purchase or that you can rent movies to watch. And so the older and more traditional one is Blockbuster example. That's the more traditional one that we remembered here that doesn't really exist much anymore, where you go to a video store, you browse a set of movies that are listed there, and then you rent them. And you get it for a certain number of days. If you return it late, there are late fees and all that. But there are a lot of components that went into the Blockbuster rental model that made it work. Then we had somebody by the name of Netflix come along. And they said, you don't have to go to a video store. You can go online, browse a whole listing of movies. You just pay one fee a month. You keep it as long as you want. When you're done watching, you send it back to us, and we'll send you the next one on your list. But that was a whole different model, a business model, and approach to addressing this problem of I want to be able to choose movies that I want to watch and watch them when I want to watch them. Then we have the Redbox, which build these kiosks that they place in a number of different locations. And so instead of having to drive to a video rental store, you just have to go to the closest retail location that has a rental. Now, it only costs $1 per day to rent, so it's a lot cheaper than any of the other options. But your options available are only those movies that are actually in that kiosk. And so there's some disadvantages to you, while you get some other benefits associated with that. Then finally, and there's lots of companies doing this now, is the ability right from the comfort of your home to go to your TV and select a movie and watch it right then, and you pay for it, online. And of course, Netflix offers that option also, as well as several other companies. And so you start to see that, in this case, the product and the business model are so closely linked, you can't take them apart. And the way that they implement the business model is part of creating that competitive advantage. The last point I want to talk about then is the market strategy. And so when we look at the market strategy, I'm going to focus on this bottom point here. First is that question of how do we motivate buyers in our target market to recognize their problem and to solve their problem by purchasing your product. That's the ultimate goal of what we are trying to do for the product or for the market strategy. So questions that we have to answer will be, who is our target market? Who are the buyers and users within that? And the reason I emphasize this, and I've seen this in many cases with young startups and even mature companies, is as they're bringing a new product to market, they are afraid to focus on a particular target market. And the reality is that you do not have an unlimited marketing budget. You're always going to have some kind of limitations around your ability to market. And so if you try to reach out to a broad market, you're going to only have a small impact on each of those different segments within that market. But if you focus your efforts on a very clear target market, or maybe a couple target markets, then that limited budget that you're going to have is going to have a much greater impact. It's also going to help you to focus your product development efforts because you are focused on solving problems specifically targeted toward them. In addition to that, then you want to talk the problems they're solving. How are you going to position your product in the marketplace? How do you want to be perceived in the market versus other competitive products? And then finally, what are the key messages that you want to communicate so that people will be motivated to look at your product as a potential way to solve their problems? So that's the last component here of those 4 pillars that we'll be talking about. So, starting with the market problem, building a product and a business model that addresses that market problem, and then finally creating a market strategy that motivates your target market to solve their problem by purchasing your product. So this goes back to the discovery process that I've talked about. These are the 4 key pillars that we want to be able to focus on and make sure that we understand clearly as we follow this process all the way through to where we have a product in the marketplace. And you start off with a hypothesis, with an understanding of here's what we think the opportunity looks like. We validate that. We make sure that the opportunity can be profitable. Then we build a solution to solve those problems and then take that to market. And all through that, we are learning from our customers. We're keeping our customers at the center of this to make sure that we are producing a product that effectively meets their needs. One of the key considerations that we have to think of as we go through this process is what kind of time investment are we going to make in doing this? Because you could spend a significant amount of time trying to iterate and validate lots of different parts of your questions that you have. And so the real question you have to ask yourself is, what is your cost of being wrong? If your cost of being wrong is very low, you might skip some of the steps that we'll be talking about because it's much faster for you to go and actually just build something and present it than it is to go through the validation, discovery and validation process. But in most cases, your risk of being wrong is fairly high. And so at that point, you need to go back through and do the validation steps that we will be talking about to reduce that risk that you have and to do so with a lower investment cost in doing so. So this is an introduction to what this process looks like. And you can see we have about 25 or 30 different phases that we'll go through. The key point that I want to emphasize is if you join us for the complete workshop, we are going to spend somewhere around 50% of our discussion right here, because that is the starting point. This is the part of where if you don't understand that market problem really, really well, then it's going to be hard to do the rest of the things correctly. And so we're going to spend 50% of that workshop, which is the better part of the whole first session, and then about half of the second session, working and understanding these aspects of this overall process. And then we'll take you through actually the building of the solution, the steps you need to be thinking about as you're doing that, and then how do you acquire those first customers. So I know Anna's going to talk about this, present a slide on this again, but I just want to point out to you that these slides that I'm presenting now is just the start of the workshop, and we're offering it as the lunch and learn for SG. But if you want to participate in the full workshop, there are 3 additional web sessions that we'll be doing starting on April 22, and it is $99 per participant. Anna has just posted a link there for registration, and I'm sure she'll post it again. But I'd love to have you join us as we go through the workshop. One of the parts that I like to emphasize is that it's taking time to do some exercises, so you'll be able to do some exercises on your own products or services that you're working on, and we'll be able to have some time to also discuss those and provide you feedback on that. So with that, I thank you so much, and I know that there have been some questions that have been posted, and so what I will do is Anna is passing those to me right now, and I will go and follow up on those and answer those questions. And if you do have additional questions, we still have another 5 or 10 minutes here that we can spend answering questions. Okay, so the first question is around, is it that people need to recognize their situation as a problem, or is it that you show the problem as part of the selling process? And the answer to that is it can be both. So there will be circumstances of where people recognize their problem on their own, and they're proactively looking at ways to solve that problem. And so those are great opportunities because you don't have to do any education or teaching of them around the problem other than to communicate to you how you can best solve that problem for that. But often when you are in the early stages of bringing a new product category into the marketplace, many of your potential customers are not going to immediately recognize that they have a problem. And so that is where you need to be able to communicate to them and help them understand that you do have a problem. And so there are sales techniques and questioning approaches that can help you do that, and we'll talk about those in the workshop. But yeah, so it can be both ways. It might be that they already recognize the problem, and you don't have to convince them of it, but there are many other situations, especially in a business-to-business world, that you need to help somebody become aware of the problem. Now, if you think about the consumer market and look at advertising that is done, sometimes part of advertising is to make their target market feel like they're missing something. So help them become aware of this need that they didn't realize they had, and help create demand around that. So both ways are necessary. The second one is, is basically selling a product people do not know they need. Yeah, there's going to be both circumstances again. So there are going to be times, where people know they need the product, and there are other situations of where they don't know they need it, or it's not necessarily at their top of mind. So let me see if I can think of an example. I can remember about probably about 14 years ago, that when I was running a small business, it felt like every week I was getting 2 or 3 calls from a company that was trying to tell me I need to change my phone service to them. And here was the issue, is that I didn't really have a problem there, or even if I did have a problem and they could save me a small amount of money, it wasn't the biggest problem on my mind. And so the point that I'm trying to make to build on this is that in some circumstances, they do have a problem. They may even know they have that problem, but there are so many other problems that in their mind are bigger to them that you have to bring the other problem back up to a level where they start to become aware of it. I'll say this also, is that quite often people look at marketers and say marketers create needs. And marketers don't create needs. All we do is to make people aware of these needs. Those needs always exist. They're always there. You know, people are always looking to try to do things faster, better, cheaper, etc. And so a lot of what we are doing is trying to understand those needs so well that we can solve those needs, and then that we can communicate back out how well we can solve those needs. And so that's part of what I want to add on there. I think I've answered the question. Oh, no, there's another one. It's about, you know, what market research is necessary to find out what customers want. And so in the workshop, we'll talk about this in a much more detailed approach, but there are two levels of research that you can do. One is what we call secondary research. And with secondary research, you are looking at information sources that already exist. So you're doing searches on the internet, you're using Google to on specific search terms, and what you're trying to discover is, what are people talking about? What are they saying that might be issues for them? What are trends that are going on in the marketplace that might help point us toward a potential opportunity? But that's just let me understand kind of the trend going on. Let me understand the conversation that is going on. But it doesn't really help you get to understand in detail the market problems. And so the only way that you can really get down to understanding market problems is by talking to those people that are in your target market. And so in the workshop, we're going to teach you a full methodology of how do you go out and identify people that you can talk to, how do you get contact with them, and then how do you go and you know, have those conversations with them that allow you to understand their problems. So yeah, market research is essential in doing that. You know, once you get into doing, you know, you have an established product, and those of you that are familiar with some of the lean startup strategies, you know, especially in software products, they talk a lot about experimentation. And so experimentation is another form of market research. But that really, you know, the experimentation, I think, is best when you're trying to refine your product or optimize your product. But when you're trying to get the initial version out there, experimentation, I think, is not an adequate approach to do that. All right. Another question, what are some indicators that the market is ready or will buy my product? So the couple indicators is, you know, when you are going out and talking to potential customers, if they start to say, you know, I want to be your first tester of this, as soon as you have it ready, you know, as soon as you have a product, I'm willing to buy it. Well, that's a pretty good indicator right there. We'll talk about some other things that as you're developing the product, you know, if you are demonstrating your product to customers and they're starting to say, you know, hey, I'm ready to buy that, that's a good indicator. But I think the other thing that you will, you know, want to look at is just how deeply, or, you know, when you talk to potential customers, how do they express it as a problem? How deep a problem do they express it as being? And so if their indicator is, yeah, you know, every once in a while I run into that, and it is a bit of a problem for me, you know, and if there's something out there I might think about it, well, that starts to be an indicator it probably isn't so bad. But once they start expressing, this is urgent for us, you know, we are losing money because of this, or I'm unable to do these kind of things, that is an indicator of how important it is for them. So I think that's the initial measure that you have to look at, is how, when you talk to them about that problem, how strongly do they talk about it? You know, what kind of importance do they place around being able to address that? All right, what metrics or what do we need to look at for having feedback that our strategy is going the correct way? The ultimate metric that you're looking for is revenue. But what I like to say is that revenue is more of a what we call lagging indicator, and it's not an indicator that helps you show that you are going in the right way. And so some of the things that you will be looking at early on is, as you're doing some of your customer conversations, as you're starting to show your product to these potential customers, how strong of interest do they express in it? As you actually have the product in the marketplace, you're going to want to look at your lead generation statistics. You're going to want to see how fast are potential leads moving through the sales process, and what kind of conversion rates you're getting as they go through the sales process. Those are going to be some of the indicators that you're going to look at. There are other products that if you have some built-in instrumentation in the product, which you can do in the software world, you might look at usage capabilities. And so, the bottom line is to really create the right metrics, you have to understand your business model. And then you track those metrics that drive your business model. Okay, another question. How do I define price for my product? I'm going to give this is not going to be a detailed answer, but one of the things you want to look at is, how does your potential customer value it? So if I'm selling into a business market, I want to understand how much money am I saving for them, or how much new revenue am I going to help them create? And so that's the starting point. You have to understand how much value your customer is going to perceive from it. If you're selling into a consumer market, then that value is not necessarily going to be tied to, a savings in money or more revenue, but there's going to be a more intangible value that is tied to that. The other aspect you want to look at is, where are competitors pricing similar products? And what is your value differentiation relative to their products? So sometimes it's hard to get, specific price information. Other times you can go and get easily get pricing information for competitors that you can use as a point of comparison. But the part that we want to avoid when we're pricing is we don't want to just look at our cost and then mark it up. You really want to, as much as you possibly can, tie it to the perceived value for your customers. Okay, we are coming up to the end of the hour. I don't see any more questions coming through, so maybe we'll give you just a second here for any final questions. All right. If not, okay, Anna, I turn this back over to you, and you can close it out. And again, I look forward to talking to some of you when we do the full workshop and sharing some of the ideas here and helping you think through your new product. So, muchas gracias a todos, and nos vemos luego. Ana?